This is the Naomi Novik Spotlight. One-to-one, hanging out with Naomi Novik. I'm your host, Carrie Menzel, and let's go. So once in a while when I'm interviewing somebody, I haven't read any of their stuff, but I have to admit I've read everything. Because my husband was like, you need to read His Majesty's Dragon, and I'm like, okay. Several months later. So I'm going to try really hard not to geek out as much as you guys are, or we can do it together.
It's all be on the same energy.
Yeah, we're on the same energy. Yeah, and now you mentioned Levitas, I'm like all crying inside.
I know.
But the first thing I'd like to do, I assume everybody in the room, sorry about the auction that's going on next door. You know, we'll just pretend that they're cheering on our question. Yeah! I assume everyone in the room is familiar with Naomi, or are you here to learn more about Naomi? All of the above. Have fun. Okay, good. So then I guess the author of our beloved Temeraire series and A Deadly Education and Uprooted and Spinning Silver and the brand new Buried Deep story collection, we need to know introduction. But one of the, oh yeah, and very soon in September we will be seeing something else, and we're going to get to that. That's question 2. But question 1. Naomi has come to party with us at GenCon. Awesome. Naomi, what brings you to GenCon this week? What have you been doing here at the con?
So it's sort of been this kind of interesting confluence of events. I was asked to come by Magpie Games. Those of you who don't know them, they are a maker of tabletop role-playing games. And they are going to be making a Temeraire game. And so there's going to be a Kickstarter this spring, and hopefully by this time next year we will be playing Temeraire at the Magpie Nest. And then coincidentally, it turned out once I knew I was coming for Magpie that Wraithmarked Books are also here. If you don't know them, they make spectacular deluxe edition books, and they are doing a deluxe edition of the Scholomance trilogy.
Yes. If you guys haven't checked out the Wraithmarked Creative website and what they did for Temeraire, that just got on my Christmas list because I was like, oh my goodness. And the illustrations were so beautiful, and it's just...
Oh, I think you're thinking of a different thing.
Oh.
Yes, sorry. There's Grim Oak Press is doing the
Temeraire
spectacular.
Grim Oak Press.
Yes, but Wraithmarked is coming out with Deadly Education, and that will be the Kickstarter is launching next week. Sorry. So yeah.
Okay, so check that out.
Yes.
Wraithmarked Creative Kickstarter starting next week.
Yeah, and then my publisher, Penguin Random House, had a booth here the first time. So that's also really cool that they've started. I don't understand why they print all the D&D books. Why haven't they? but apparently it was their first year. So anyway, so now I came here and I've been wearing like multiple hats. Yeah. And now it's the Writers Symposium hat. So it's really fun. And actually, it's really nice to be here with so much to do. But I mean. And I'm not just saying this for the panel, I'm saying this literally. I've been texting my husband saying, we should come here when I don't have to do anything. Because it's just, I love the vibe of just being able to go and pick up games and just play games for a whole weekend. That sounds amazing. So yeah.
Even the local workers are like, I love GenCon the best. You guys are the nicest and most fun. So yeah, I agree.
It's a really nice vibe.
Yeah.
It's a really nice
I
vibe.
never get bored here at GenCon.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to what is coming up for you. We've got this exciting Temeraire role-playing game coming out. We've got Wraithmarked Creative. What is just around the corner that we've already had a little with?
Yes. So actually, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a spiel because the thing that actually is occupying my mental and writing space right now is not just a book. It's a series. It's called Folly. And this is a massive, sprawling thing. And because it is so massive, it's got an ensemble cast, it stretches over multiple continents, it encompasses an entire secondary world, and it's also taking place in multiple time periods, and there might be time travel. I haven't fully decided, but anyway. But the point is, this is so large and complicated that I, laid down the law for my publisher that I was not giving it to them until it is done, right? So just the whole thing, and it might be 7 books. So I'm writing, I'm writing along, but so I'm about halfway through the 2nd book at this point with a lot of material that I'm not sure where it's going, but. So obviously that means a long time without a book published, and my publisher was a little anxious about this. So I said, all right, let's come up with some other projects that I can do in the meantime. And one of the things we thought of was Very Deep, which was really helpful because, so they wanted some original stories, so I wrote a Scholomance short story for it, and then I wrote a story that turned out to be me writing myself into the world of folly, and that is The Long Way Round. So it's like a prequel to the whole world of folly. And so there was the anthology, and then we had the thought that it's been 10 years since Uprooted came out. And so I said, what about a 10th year anniversary new edition with a cover, and I'll write a short story for it. So we did this. The cover is amazing. If you haven't had a chance to see, I think actually they're sold out of it at the Random House booth, but it's really beautiful. And I started writing a short story for the back of it, and it turned into a novella. This is a problem for me with short stories. So anyway, then they said, well, let's publish it as a novella, and that is The Summer War, and that will be coming out this September. And it is, I'm trying to think how to describe it. It's sort of a take on elves, but where they're sort of, the take of immortal beings in general, and what that actually would mean to be immortal in terms of memory and the things you kept important, and so I hope you'll like it. It's obviously a little jewel box of a book, but I think they've done a really beautiful job with making it. And so then I had to write a different short story for Uprooted, so I wrote that, and that short story was called The Lake Witch. And for Spinning Silver, I thought I'll just write a sequel to The Lake Witch, so it'll be fun because you'll have a piece of that story in both the. And that turned into a novella. So it looks like there'll be a Lake Witch novella, possibly, as well, before Folly. And then I had to write another short story for yes, and that one it's actually a kind of Robin Hood story, although it's more of a Maid Marian story. Yes, and so those are all the current writing things that are coming down the pike. But that's probably really it until Folly. And Folly, the goal is for me to hand it in September 26, which means publication in 27. I don't know if that's going to be true. So my editor doesn't know, I don't know. Hopefully, we'll see.
While we're all waiting with bated breath, we can play a heck of a lot of Temeraire.
Yes.
Do they have a name for that role-playing game yet?
I think they're calling it Temeraire, the role-playing game.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm very excited.
And
they're making some amazing art. Oh, just super cool art.
Are they having you do writing for that game, or are they taking stuff from the books?
No, they're developing it from the books. They've been asking me questions about it. But one of the really interesting things that they came up with a really smart mechanic, and they showed me how some of their game system that they're using for it works. And the concept that they came up with, which I didn't understand how this was going to work until they sort of went into the details, you're going to be able to play either as a human or as a dragon. So you can play a dragon, you can play a human. They've got they've got a great idea for using formations as a kind of sort of container around the party, right? So that they have things, they'll have ways to bring characters together, whether you're playing a dragon or a person. So, and yeah, it's a really great mechanic. If you are at all interested in role-playing games, I suggest, keeping an eye out for it.
That's absolutely delightful. Do they have a guess as to when that will be released?
Well, they plan to have, hopefully, so the Kickstarter will be in the spring, and then they will have playable copies, possibly not the final copies, but playable copies here at GenCon next year. I think that's the idea.
Tremendous. We need to read all 9 books before next GenCon. Make sure it's all right. Okay, so speaking of folly, how did a little castle in Central Park inspire a story?
So it's a really weird way to be inspired for me. Normally, when I start writing a book, I get the first line, and it goes from there. With folly, I was walking in the park with a friend. In Central Park, there's a little castle called Belvedere Castle. It's and it's a joke. Like it was built as a sort of toy castle, right? It's got 3 floors that have a single room on it. That's basically the size of this stage, and a tiny little turret that you can climb up, and it's really adorable. And I had my wedding pictures taken there, and I was just looking at it, and I've been thinking for a while about wanting an epic to tell a story on an epic scale with an ensemble cast. And so I'd had that percolating in the back. And then I saw the castle, and for some reason I thought of it, look at the folly, right? Because it's a folly in that sort of classic sense of, funny building, built that has no purpose. And I literally sort of saw a book cover with the word folly across it. And I was like, right, obviously I have to write this now. And because it's such an unusual way for me to come to it, I literally, I took one run after another at it. I have 3 or 4 sort of false starts, figuring out what I wanted follies to be, how I wanted them to work. And finally, I sort of was like, none of this is quite working. And then I wrote the short story for Very Deep. And both found, I'd been trying a little too hard in a way, and so the voice wasn't kind of working. And then when I started writing the short story, it all kind of started to click. And I wrote the short story, for those of you who haven't read it, is essentially about the discovery of a new continent. So there's human civilization exists in one part of this world on a handful of small continents called the Heartlands, and they think the whole rest of the world is the empty ocean. And then a group of them get really fed up with the taxes that are being charged, the tolls that are essentially being charged to cross in front of this nation, and they decide they want to find a route that goes a long way around. And they start sailing, and they run into a continent, and it seems to be completely empty of people. There don't seem to be any people there. But they start finding these strange, sometimes monumental structures that make no sense, that don't seem like they had to have been built by someone, but clearly nobody's around to have built them. There's no other signs of civilization anywhere around. These follies can't be damaged. They don't seem to do anything. They just sit there. And they find a whole series of them as they journey the long way around this continent and finally make it home. And by the end of it, they think these things don't do anything. They just sit there. They're literally just ornamental or decorative. But here's a whole continent to sort of expand into, to live in. And then the actual novels pick up several hundred years later. And in a time when people have learned how to make sense of the follies, after people live near a folly for a few generations, they learn to some of them sort of begin to share the madness of the follies. And when you sort of become attuned to a folly and are folly born, you end up being graced by certain kinds of magical powers. And each one of them has different powers that are related to the kind of folly that it is. And so, these are sort of, I'm describing like kind of the bare bones details that don't really mean anything. The underlying idea is it's about how places and people shape one another and what it means to inhabit a place, to feel at home there. And also it's a kind of a very sprawling story that's sort of also to me about storytelling and about the multiplicity of stories. And so that's kind of what folly is about. And now I'm really, it's going full throttle, but it took me, I would say, about a year to sort of get my way into it, to really get stuck into it, and then a few months to sort of really start picking up steam. And now I'm going at about 30,000 words a month.
Wow.
And so it's a lot. It's already a lot. But it's going to be very big. And I've told my publisher, at some point I'm going to show up and just give you a box full of book, and you have to figure out what to do with it. Yeah.
So how many of you in the audience are authors and writers or want to become writers and authors? So I was going to ask, taking a year of false starts and, no, not quite, no. What helped you keep trying?
Bluntly, having a spouse with an independent income. Look, it's one of the things that people don't talk about enough in terms of writing full-time as a career. Writing full-time as a career is very feast or famine. You're at the mercy of publisher royalties. You frequently don't know what those are going to be before the check turns up. A lot of newer writers make the mistake of, which I often want to caution people against, of like assuming that the first check comes in and it's enough to quit your job. You can't quit your job, right? And obviously having a partner who is able to and willing to support us, even if my royalties slow down, is a huge thing. And that's an enormous privilege. And if you don't have that, then you need to be more strategic and more conservative. And in fact, I hasten to say, that's not necessarily bad for your art. In fact, I've often felt that there are writers who have trouble the other direction. Like if you get too successful and you don't have to write, it stops them writing. They don't get it done. And for me, that is not my problem, because writing is what I do for fun when I'm not writing.
We can hear it because we want to read those things.
Yes. But it's, a lot of great art has been made under the economic constraint of needing to feed yourself. And obviously, it's one of those complicated things where it's different for different people. For some people it's freeing, for some people it's inhibitory. But having another secure source of income that's stable is definitely gives you more power in sort of things like negotiations with publishers, right? That it's always better for that. And obviously in this case though, that's compounded by the fact that I have now written many books for them. They know that when I say I'm going to give you a book, it may come in like 3 months after the deadline, but I'm going to give it to them. I do finish the things I start. It was really important to me to finish Temeraire, for there to be a satisfying conclusion. They've also seen me write multiple different things, right? They've seen me write Temeraire, they've seen me write Uprooted and Spinning Silver, they've seen me write Deadly Education. They know that I will not sit in the box. I'm like a cat that gets in the box and then like gets out of the box. And like, as soon as you try to take the picture of the cat, right? It's like, no, I don't want this box anymore. And that gives them trust, right? And I've kept my editor up to date. I'm not letting her see it because I know as soon as I give her the first book, she's gonna be like, we could just publish this. But yeah.
It's like knowing yourself, staying true to yourself, continuing on, building your career, knowing you can trust yourself to write the books,
Yeah.
and others can trust you to deliver.
Yeah. And I will say also, I would not have advised myself to do this earlier in my career. A thing that's been happening in this book, in the series, is that I've often done a lot of interviews where people ask me, are you discovering? Do you plan? Do you outline? And for all my previous books, I basically didn't outline. But in Scholomance, it started kind of knowing where I was going and actually going there. And so far for Folly, I came up with an outline for my editor because Random House has a requirement in their contracts, which is because their accounting department wants multiple points at which they pay you for reasons. I don't know, reasons. Bless you. So because of that, I give my editor an outline and I'm just like, this thing is going in the trash. It's totally wrong. And in fact, every specific folly that I named, every character that I put into that outline, none of them, they're all gone. None of them are there. But the overall kind of structure of what's happening is actually turning out to be what's happening. And I'm not wedded to it. That's why I'm like, there might be time travel. There's time travel in the outline, and I kind of think that's going to be there. But I don't sort of hold to it. But it's clearly something that comes with time, right? The more you write, the more you build up the muscles for writing, and you start to be able to kind of see a little further ahead, even as a discovery writer. And in fact, I know a good friend who's an outline writer, like a meticulous outline writer, who is suddenly becoming less of one, who's starting to find himself able to let go of the outline and write in a more discovery way. And I do think that it's probably because whichever way you learn to write, whatever technique you learn to write, the more you do it, the more you sort of have to pick up the techniques that enable someone else to write in the other way, right?
At many of our sessions throughout the Writers Symposium, we tell you these are tools for your toolbox. And you are going to be on a spectrum, right? You won't necessarily be 100% discovery or 100% outline. You're going to be somewhere along there, and that space can shift for you. And it can shift by day or by project. Sometimes you're going to need little gifts from other things.
I'm going to jump in here because one of the things I've also been working on in my cooper's free time is I'm building a new social media site. And we've been working with AI coding tools, right? And so in this context, I read an article about Anthropic's AI, where they did a study where they asked the AI how it added two-digit numbers. And it was really interesting because the AI straight up lied to them. The AI said, the way I add two-digit numbers is I take the ones column and I add them together, and if it's more than 10, I carry the 1. And it explained adding typically the way that we are all taught to add two-digit numbers, right? But then they instrumented the innards of the machine and found that was not actually what was happening. In fact, it was using, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but it doesn't matter. They were using a heuristic, the model was using a heuristic where every time it saw numbers that were sort of like 35 and 69, like let's say it was being told to add those two numbers, every time it saw those two numbers, the end digit was sort of like a 4. and then the next digit was sort of this number, and it used the adding from 0 to 9 for the ones digit, and then kind of what we would almost say guessed, predicted in a heuristic way what the second digit would be. And what I found striking about this is the discrepancy between how we think we do things, including writing, and how we actually do that. Because, right, when we say we outline, what is actually happening? You're sitting there, you're sitting in front of the page, you've got a pen, and you put words on the page. How is that happening, right? We're actually lying. What's actually happening is like electrical impulses are firing in our brains in some complicated pattern that we don't actually understand. And so what I think thinking about it that way is taking that step back and realizing that whenever we're talking about a process in situations like this, right, when you ask a writer, how do you do this? Every answer is a lie, right? Because the answer is, we don't freaking know how we write. We don't know. So the thing to take away from that as a writer, I think, as somebody who's trying to learn to be a better writer, is to throw stuff at the wall and kind of see what sticks. Because it's not so much, so for instance, not so much that writing an outline in a particular model might be good. It's that sitting down and forcing yourself to try and do something that you're not instinctively doing is stretching a muscle in your brain, right? And so doing exercises, even if you kind of think they're probably stupid exercises, even if you don't like them as a writer, I think is probably good advice and is worth thinking about. That's sort of how to find ways to make your brain do things that it can't do yet by forcing it to do things that you don't necessarily like doing. So I sort of throw that out there for those of you who are aspiring writers.
She's all doing writer push-ups now.
Goodness gracious.
So that brings me to another question I was going to ask later, but I'll ask it now. How is your writing process different, or not at all different, for when you're writing something like Temeraire that's much more like sort of historical versus Deadly Education versus short fiction versus how has your writing process changed between different types of writing and different projects?
Kind of not. I'm always writing for myself as my first audience. I'm always answering the question of what's the next line of the story that I want to read. And that's happening no matter what. I now sort of can tell when an idea is kind of short story length, but not completely accurately, as my story started as the panel betrays. And frequently, in fact, I tend to complicate things as I go. I would say the difference that's happened on Folly is because I went in with this idea that I was building a secondary world, I actually almost did the sort of thing that I used to do as a dungeon master, which is I have a little wiki for myself that I've been filling out, and I literally, I named all the continents. I hired a cartographer to make me a map and generate all the climates, and make it compatible with tectonic drift, and I've been writing the prehistory of the universe. I wrote up little stories I named a bunch of cities. I've hired a conlanger who's inventing languages for me. We've got about 17. And basically sort of creating all these pieces where, frankly, I would normally say, don't do that. Don't get bogged down in don't nail down too much of your world. I needed to nail down some of my world because I was literally on another planet, right? And so then though, at the end, it still came down to, I wrote the first line, and I went from there. And I did have this idea of the follies and the people who were sort of connected and attuned to them. And really just sort of exploring that and trying to think that through and trying to write these people. And once I started doing it enough, now I know what a folly is, I understand how it works, I can write new ones fairly quickly, and now what I'm doing with them is I'm building the larger story. But that is a very different way of working for me. The individual pieces of the follies and the scenes that happen with them, I'm I'm rearranging them in the document, where typically I would write from start to finish. Yeah, so those are the ways in which my process has changed. But that's, I think, due to the complexity of the narrative and the number of moving parts, which has sort of demanded that. And I feel like if you're a newer writer, I would really urge not starting out with like an epic fantasy. It's especially if you love epic fantasy, right? And so many of us do, right? So many of us, that's our gateway drug, right? We come in on an epic fantasy story because, in a way, it's the biggest journey. And I think all of us who love fantasy love to take that journey, love to step into another world. And because of that, it's really tempting to feel like you have to build the whole other world. But in a way, it's good as a writer, it's helpful as a writer to learn how to build that world piece by piece, as opposed to forcing yourself to write the whole world to begin with. And obviously, I got my start writing fanfic. I wrote fanfic for 10 years before I ever tried to write a novel. And so it's a really great way to kind of work inside a world and building new pieces onto worlds before writing a completely new world.
Yeah, and Naomi's been pivotal in Organization for Transformative Works and
Woo!
If you're thinking about developing your skills and tools, look into those websites for inspiration on more writing. Okay, so speaking of discovery writing the first sentence going on until the end, before having a map and the different sections of folly, how did you keep track of multiple threads and storylines at once?
I mean, to be honest, I just remember them. Sorry, that's sorry. It's I'm a feast or famine writer. I don't get up in the morning and write 1,000 words a day. I've been doing this thing with a friend of mine. We've been using a spreadsheet to track our word counts, and I mean, she is just every single day there's a chunk of words. And I have stretches when it's 0 words, 0 words, 0 words, 6,000 words, 0 words, 0, 3,000 words, right? My writing tends to go in these bursts. And so I tend to write very quickly, large amounts, and I have all of it in my head. And whenever I sit down after an extended gap, I typically start by rereading everything and revising along the way, sort of making tweaks and things along the way. And that's the sort of thing where that's kind of what I do, is just reread. And actually it's one of those things, there are a lot of people, there's sort of a divide between people who like to reread stuff and also like to reread their own work versus people who don't like to reread. My husband hates to reread and he hates to revise. I love to do both. It's the most fun part of writing, I feel like. So, yeah.
More tools for your toolbox. So what has it been like to work with a cartographer and a linguist?
I mean, it's great. It's really fun. It helps to have experience. It helps to know really clearly what it is you want. I went in to the cartographer with an idea of sort of the small number of continents around the Central Ocean, and in fact, in the process, discovered some important things about my world, and that really was helpful to me. Having that sort of external input often creates a spark. It's one of the reasons why I like to travel. I've been doing a lot of traveling for folly. I've been finding follies sort of all over the world in a way, and very often now I go to a place and I'm like, right, that's a folly. You know, like for instance here, the Crown Plaza Hotel, which is where I'm staying, is a folly, right? It's at the train station.
Oh my
God. It's the ghost of the train station, right? And it's a slightly too advanced folly for my technological level, but that doesn't necessarily matter in my book. But the way the building shakes when the trains go through still, and the ghosts of the statue ghosts all over the place, and it's just amazing. If you haven't, like, stick your head in the lobby over there. It's really kind of wild. But so finding that having external inputs is really helpful. With the linguist, one of the things that I've been doing is it's really been helpful for naming, because one of the things that was inspiring to me was the way, for those of you who have both read the books and seen the show Game of Thrones, right? In the books, the families, it's very deliberately medieval, right? There are these huge families of interconnected people, loads and loads of characters. And then in the show, they pruned it down so that each sort of house, they still had a lot of houses, a lot of moving parts for a TV show. But each one was sort of almost like a nuclear family, reduced down to a nuclear family. And they infused, and the personal relationships between the individual people became much more intense and meaningful because of that. And so part of the idea of folly is sort of trying to have that sense in which the people of a folly, they're not necessarily related by blood, but they are still kind of the family of the folly, like whether or not they are literally a family. And that sort of that connection means that individual sort of personal relationships have these sort of larger implications, right? How you feel about somebody else in your folly can make a huge, or the person from the next folly over, can make a huge difference to the world, right? It sort of puts things on a different scale, human relationships on a different scale of power, which is kind of interesting to play with. And I have now forgotten where we started the question.
It sounds like another really great role-playing game set. You said anyone from Mankind?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, my next question is, at your position right now, doing all this writing, starting this huge project, the intensity of working through everything. But you've been here running around. You're probably going to be at World Science Fiction.
No, I'm not doing. I mean, I'm going to be in Poland, looking for follies.
Awesome.
I've been doing almost no conventions at all for the last couple of years while I've been working here. I've been saying no to all invitations pretty much, unless it's a really unusual situation. Like here, Magpie really wanted me to come, and they're announcing the game, so obviously, I came. But I've mostly been saying no to everything.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You've already noticed how intense GenCon be. Something to do every minute.
Yeah.
So what I was going to ask you is, what excites you most about the current landscape of fantasy and speculative fiction, or what you're learning about the landscape of role-playing games and sort of this environment of the right now?
I mean, to be honest, what I realize every time I walk around a con is how little I actually know about the landscape. That I'm in my own kind of little corner doing my own work. And I happen, I sort of know what my writer pals are working on, and other than that, to be honest, I don't know that I want to pay too much attention. I'm not somebody who cares about where the industry is or what's going on. I'm trying to make good art, and obviously, it's not that I don't care about how well things sell, but I think of that as the job of my agent and my publisher. There was a point, actually just before I wrote Uprooted, where I knew that I was pretty close to done with Temeraire. I didn't want to I don't believe in a series that just keeps going on and on and on. I wanted to bring it to a close. And so I was thinking about what am I going to do next? And I wrote up a proposal because that's what people do, what professional authors do, right? You write up a proposal and you send it to your editor. And they made me an offer, but it was kind of a lowball offer. And I looked at it and I was just like, this means they don't think this is going to sell. And so I was like, nah, never mind, I'll do something else. And they were like, wait, where are you going? You're going to a different publisher. No, don't do. And I'm like, no, I'm just not going to do this. I'm going to do something, because a novel, right? And this is the difference between like when I'm writing fanfic versus when I'm writing a novel. When I'm writing fanfic, I don't care. I have written like parents where literally my story was the one and only one on the archive for that parent, because I'm just writing it for me and I'm just having fun, and it's just the story that I want to write at that particular moment. Professional work requires you to keep writing even when you're not in script. And in the end, what's always interesting is every writer that I know, afterwards, when you look at the whole thing, you're like, you can't tell the parts that were hard, that were a slog. Obviously, that's not to say that you should never write the boring bits if you're bored, but if it's just hard, that's a different thing. But that's the job. That's what makes it a job, and it's a great job. But that is a job. But I'm not going to do that and then also do the promo, which is absolutely a job, for something. If my publisher, who has vastly more experience in the market and knowing what is going to sell, doesn't think it's going to be financially viable for them, if they don't think so, they probably know better than me. So I don't want to think about it. I don't want to analyze the market. I don't want to see what else somebody else publishing. Because it doesn't matter, ideas are nothing. Execution is everything when it comes to writing. It's all about the execution. And if somebody else wanted to write Dragons in the Napoleonic Wars, you can do that. That's not a copyrightable idea. And if somebody's critique of that was like, oh, they're ripping off Temeraire, I feel like my answer would be, it would totally depend on whether it was itself a good thing or not. If it was, then it wouldn't matter that it could potentially be described with the same meaningless elevator pitch as Temeraire, yeah. So that's sort of what I would say.
So speaking of people playing with Temeraire and playing in your Napoleonic dragon writing world, how excited are you about this role-playing game, and what are you so excited about seeing us do with it?
Tell stories of your own. Again, this is because I come from a place of fanfic and that community where it's all about telling stories together, telling stories to each other. I really love the idea that, and one of the things is, when I'm writing, obviously, I wanted there to be a conclusion to Temeraire. I wanted there to be a conclusion to Uprooted, Spinning Silver, Deadly Education, but I wanted it to feel like the world kept going, right? That it's not like the world stops existing. One of my absolute favorite series, one of the endings that I hate the most is Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising series, where at the end they all forget that magic exists, and their memories of all the events are taken away. And I'm like, what the hell? No, right? I want the reader to feel like it's all still there, it's all still going on, and more things are happening to the characters. You just don't know. This story has come to an end. And what that means is that ideally, you should be able to imagine all sorts of other stories into the Temeraire universe. And I think that what playing games together, doing that in the context of a tabletop role-playing game, is it allows story to kind of emerge. I mean, I love this about all role-playing games, right? That you don't know what the story is going to be when you sit down at the table, and surprises happen, interesting things happen, interpersonal dynamics change things. You know, you have, even when your DM has like a planned encounter, very often it goes completely sideways. And that's the magic of it. And you know, in fact, we were talking about this at the world building panel with Magpie, which is that when I'm writing a novel, I tend to not build the world until I need, I don't want to build any piece of the world until I need it. But for a role-playing game, you need the world built out. But, you know, I built out that world for 9 books, so now it's a pretty big world. And it has enough structure there that I think they're going to do a great job of distilling it into structure that will help people have, you know, get into it and tell stories together and just have adventures in it that can then, I don't know, make the universe feel alive. I believe I want the universe to be alive in people's minds.
So, if you were going to sit down to play with somebody game mastering this for you, what kind of character would you make?
Wow. I mean, it's tempting to. I would probably want to play a dragon. I would probably want to play a dragon. Yeah. You know, trying to think what kind of dragon. It would be interesting.
An Imperial? Or too fancy?
I don't know. I mean, that would be the interesting question. Would you want to play a dragon that's sort of on? I feel like it might be actually interesting to play a smaller dragon who's a bit crafty. Yeah, like a dragon who's trying to backseat drive their formation. Right? I feel like that would be kind of fun. That, you know, the smartest dragon in the formation, who's not actually the biggest and the toughest dragon in the formation, and therefore has to be like, you know, I really think we should do that. I think that would be kind of fun. There you go.
Gravitas up front.
Right.
Really behind us. Well, that brings us towards our end. We can have time to take one question from one person in the audience. You got your hand up first. There we go.
You mentioned that in an outline that you had mentioned characters that are no longer in your using. So I'm curious to hear about your process of deciding when the character doesn't assume what you're trying to write versus the difficult part you just can't figure out being pushed through.
So in this case, to be honest, my answer is a little kind of like, the outline was just garbage, and I knew it was garbage, and I didn't care. I just made up some characters and put them in. But the answer was actually a little more complicated than that. So in this case, the outline that I wrote, I'd been taking one start at Folly, and I thought I'd written a Folly and like some characters in it, and then afterwards I was like, nah, this isn't quite working. Because what happened was I started writing a second Folly, and it was alive. It came alive for me. And when I say that, you know, one of the things that you get, and one of the values that I got from writing fanfic, is that I wrote so much fic and posted it a lot, and I finished stories and I posted them a lot, that I learned to know when something was really hitting, right? When I'm just like, we call it the crack of the bat, and you're like, you hit the ball and you're like, that one's going out of the park. And now as a writer, I look for that sensation, and if I don't feel it, I keep trying. So I wrote the outline because they were going to give me a paycheck when I wrote the outline and handed it to them. And I knew that I was going to throw it away, and they knew that I was going to throw it away, and we all understood this. And it was just about the stage at which I was writing it. Like now, if I wrote an outline, almost none of those characters would go away. The characters now their names may change as the languages, as we finalize the languages. We're aiming for this September to finalize all the languages. And one of the key pieces that I'm using the languages for is to name people consistently. And I realize this is the tangent that I flew off on when I started talking about Game of Thrones. That I want the characters from a given folly, all their names, to feel consistent in a way. And the way I'm doing that is by making them all conform to the rules of the language that underpins the individual follies. Even though the whole book is written the way I'm describing it is, it's written in their local, in the water tongue, which is the trade language that everybody's using. But I'm translating the water tongue into English, right? So the language you read the book in is the primary language that they speak. But these other languages are sort of like their historical languages, and so I'm using that for naming. And that's, and so I am going to change some character names, but for the most part now, once I start writing, I know. There will be pieces of the story that I will take out because they don't fit in the flow of the narrative, of the whole book. But that'll be because I get to the end or I get further on and I'm like, this isn't working, I have to revise this. And I'm always, at all times, ready to throw stuff away and rewrite. Which is really important. If you are a discovery writer, if you don't want to plan things out, you have to be open to getting rid of the stuff that doesn't work with the newer stuff you write. Because I generally feel like the newest, the last sentence you wrote is the one that has the most kind of work behind it and is almost always the correct one. And if it's inconsistent with something you've done before, you should probably go back and get rid of the stuff before and change it to match.
Mm-hmm. So writing a story idea, we don't understand how this works in our heads.
Yeah.
Basically, magic happens. And at GenCon, magic is something you can level up in. Just as you've all done today. So let's take a moment to thank Naomi for her stories. Sorry, I forgot to say something.
Oh yeah, so I know some of you weren't able to come to my signing yesterday, so I'm gonna hop out and do a little bit of signing over at the table there thing. So I'm gonna head over there. And
Writers Symposium personnel will direct you and help you get in line for that.